Convicted killer Lori Daybell is finally set to be sentenced again here in Arizona. The so-called Doomsday Mom, already serving life for the murders of her 2 children and conspiring to kill her husband's first wife, now facing judgment for multiple murder plots. She was found guilty of conspiring to murder her 4th husband, Charles Vallow, and attempting to kill her former nephew-in-law. Her decision to represent herself unraveled in an Arizona courtroom, exposing her failures. Now, after years of dark twists and national headlines, Daybell's path comes full circle before she's returned to Idaho for life. We break down what's at stake in this sentencing and what justice means for the families left behind. I'm Justin Lum, and we are on the record. Just days away from Judgment Day for Lori Vallow Daybell, the convicted murderer and the so-called Doomsday Mom. We know she's already serving life in prison in regard to her cases in Idaho, but here we are. We've been waiting for the end of this saga for a long time. Sentencing day in Arizona for 2 convictions for conspiracy to commit murder related to Charles Vallow, her 4th husband, and her ex-nephew-in-law, Brandon Boudreaux, who survived to tell his story. I'm joined by Special Projects EP George Obi. And you recharged, you're ready to go. You had a little bit of a break just in time for sentencing and for our all-star panel.
Yeah, needed this. Obviously, as we get ready to close this chapter out, if you will, at least for the time being, and much needed break. But again, we've been looking forward to this, and we'll get into it with our panel.
What better way to get back from vacation, talking Lori Daybell. We got our panel here of 4 joining us today. Thank you guys so much. Taylor Larson, the former family attorney for Charles Vallow when he was constructing that petition to dissolve his marriage with Lori Vallow back in January of 2019. Charles Vallow then, his heart broken, raising concerns and sounding the alarm about his wife, who was threatening him at the time and claimed that she was a translated being, a goddess, and this all led up to his eventual murder July 11th, 2019, shot and killed by Alex Cox. Taylor has been there from the beginning and watched this unfold. Thank you, Taylor, for being here. Rich Robertson, also in a similar vein, connected with Brandon Boudreaux back in October of 2019, when Brandon had just been shot at, a bullet missing him by inches as he drove home in his Tesla. The shooter, believed to be Alex Cox, conspiring with his sister, Lori Vallow. Lori now recently convicted of that conspiracy. So Rich heard that strange, bizarre story and followed the path to find out a lot more. He's also a former investigative journalist here in the Valley, so thanks, Rich. And then we've got Benjamin Taylor, a well-known attorney here, criminal defense attorney, civil rights attorney here in the Phoenix area, and it's been good to have you for both trials, for our coverage to really, you're now an expert on the Daybell saga, so good to have you. And finally, last but not least, our guy, Judge Mel McDonald, former U.S. attorney for the District of Arizona, former prosecutor, as well as, that's why we call him the judge, a judge here in Maricopa County, and he also a big fan of the saga and expert, and he's got a lot to say. I can't wait to get into this, guys. But first off, let's go with Judge Mel. How surreal is it to know that after July 25th, 2025, all of this will be over, and then it's just extradition back to Idaho for the Doomsday Mom?
Yeah, you look at this, I think the reason why this case has gathered worldwide attention is the facts are so bizarre. 2 people that both parents, both seemingly normal up until their meeting, carry out these heinous crimes of murdering her 2 children, conspiring to murder them, taking out both of their spouses, and then Anissa's husband. And in looking at it, I think with the sentencing coming up, I think it's pretty certain that she will get the maximum sentence on both. I would expect the judge to make the sentences run consecutive to each other and to the Idaho cases. The long and short is she was never going to get out anyway. assuming that her convictions in Idaho are affirmed. But the truth of the matter is she should never be allowed to walk free again. And quite frankly, I hope the judge gives a directive that they are not, she and Chad are not to communicate vocally unless somebody is listening to us, simply because they have conspired and planned the murder of 5 people, 4 that were successful. And I don't think society can assume that risk.
Taylor, how about for you? I mean, can you believe it's been this long, almost 6 years since you met Charles Vallow and he came to you with just this crazy story?
Yeah, 6.5 years ago, it started, at least my involvement in this crazy chaos of Chad and Lori's world that they were, angling to, end up together. And so to have it be July when she is sentenced for Charles's murder is a bit fitting now that it's 6 years exactly to when he was murdered. So just we're just a few days away from finally getting some closure, some more closure. Anyways, we've already gotten the conviction, but now to hear her be sentenced, and hopefully, and I agree with Judge Mel that it will be the maximum for Charles's death. But I'm very anxious to hear what Judge Boreski has to say once he does sentence, because Judge Boyce, I really appreciated the words that he spoke when he spoke directly to Lori when he sentenced her up in Idaho, and I would assume that Judge Boreski's going to do the same here. I mean, she's kind of gotten into it a little bit, with Judge Boreski throughout not just Charles's trial, but also Brandon's trial. And so I'll be interested to see if Boreski keeps his calm demeanor that he's had, and that I know he's had since I've, appeared in front of him. But that's what I'm really anxious to see here in the coming days.
Yeah, you're right. 6 years since Charles was shot and killed. It has been that long. Also, Rich, very similar story here. Meeting Brandon for the first time. Some people didn't think that this day would come that he would ever get, his case heard in court. It's some question if we should even get to this point, but I mean, it has happened, and he was able to get justice for himself, telling his story, being able to face off with Lori.
Right. I mean, it's his story because he was the lone survivor in all of this. It kind of got pushed aside for the most part. I mean, all the attention was on the kids, rightfully so, and Tammy Daybell and certainly Charles' death. So Brandon's story kind of took a back seat from a media perspective, but it was always just one of the additional crimes associated with Alex and Lori and whoever else was involved in this lurid story. It was crazy 6 years ago when I first heard it, and it continues to be a crazy story. It's just mind-boggling to listen to Lori try to rationalize or explain and never really has to the satisfaction of anybody, I don't think, as to why all this happened.
Yeah, bizarre, strange religious beliefs, life insurance money, light spirits and dark spirits, and this sort of attitude about being supreme or being more special than others. That is what comes out of this story between Lori and Chad. But as a defense, as an attorney, acting as her own attorney, Benjamin, what missteps did she take throughout these 2 trials?
I mean, Justin, I'll be here all day, writing down the missteps. I mean, first off, I think the whole panel has said before, having been, representing herself, I mean, that was the number one thing. She should have definitely had some attorney represent her. Doesn't mean she would still get a not guilty, but maybe she might have gotten a hung jury. That was number one. Number two, I mean, she was asking this questions that she had no idea about. I think we go back to the first trial where she was, questioning one of the victims, dates that they had gone on a date. I mean, she just pretty much made herself look like a fool. Just her questions were just terrible. And I think, if she would have talked less and had another attorney up there representing her, she would have done a lot better. But like Taylor mentioned earlier, it's going to be very interesting to see what Judge Boreski said, sentences her to, because he's been there for the past both trials, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's listened, he's heard stuff. Plus, the judge knows stuff that we don't even know about. There's some evidence that wasn't even let into the courtroom that he's seen. So, I mean, Judge Boreski knows about everything about this case. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. But, I mean, pretty much Lori Daybell could have done a lot better just by having an attorney represent her. And she who knows what might happen in these prior cases.
So, gentlemen, we've covered this saga in the last 6 years. We know all of the wild circumstances involved and the evidence involved in this case, but we also know there was a lot of strange stuff that happened during the trial. And we know that we're not over yet, because when it comes to sentencing, we have victim impact statements, and then Lori has the opportunity to say something to the court, and then Judge Boreski will have his final say. So, Judge Mel, let me ask you this. We know how impactful those statements can be from the victims and their families. I'm curious to get your outlook on what you think Lori is going to say, or what Lori would want to avoid saying at this point, knowing that Boreski will have the final say, and then, of course, his sentence on the 25th. But we do know that, again, these statements can be very powerful. But then Lori, and the statement she's made already in court, I'm curious to see what you're expecting to hear on the 25th.
I would expect Lori, being the actress that she is, would probably try to feign some emotion. One of the most chilling parts of the case involving Lori came before the trial, on the day that Charles Vallow was gunned down. To see her afterwards taking the kids out to eat, coming home nonchalant while her brother is sitting on the curb, it absolutely sent chills up my spine. She has got to be one of the dumbest criminals in the history of the world. Utterly no emotion, no feeling. And then to compound it by representing herself in trial. It was almost comical. If she wanted to take herself and nail herself to the cross, she did it exactly the way she should do it. Stupid questions, points where there might be objections, she doesn't object, it's thereby waived. Every conceivable thing that you can imagine she could do wrong in a trial, she did. I think they should take her performance and show it to law students and the non-lawyers who are thinking of representing themselves as to how you should never be your own attorney, and why, if you've committed a crime, how not to react after you've committed the crime.
And Benjamin, you made a good point just now, a little bit earlier ago. The judge does know the whole full scope of everything. Not that he needs to bring in anything from Idaho, and we talked about opening the door, but when you look at the totality and the violence and the whole saga that Lori has now been convicted of, I mean, Charles Vallow was shot twice in the chest, just point blank, right there in her home. She was there. Her son, JJ, was asphyxiated and wrapped in duct tape and buried in the ground. Tylee you couldn't recognize her. Her remains were, in different bags in the ground of Chad Daybell's backyard. And Tammy Daybell was basically smothered and asphyxiated. And we know that there was a conspiracy there between that includes the three. It includes Alex Cox. And then Brandon Boudreaux was just shot at and could have been shot right in the head if that bullet didn't miss him by inches. So in total, she has 5 life terms right now, 3 consecutive for these murders of JJ Vallow, Tylee Ryan, and Tammy Daybell, Chad's first wife. And it's possible she could see 2 more life sentences here in Arizona. I mean, have you seen a record like this with 5 victims, 4 of them dead, and the mastermind behind it, she doesn't get the death penalty?
Yeah, this is very rare to see anything like this. I mean, this is maybe the first time I've seen something like this. Of course, you have people like Charles Manson back in the day, serial killers. But to have, her being the mastermind and be able to do this in Idaho and in Arizona and be able to like orchestrate this. That's what this whole thing's so amazing. How she had so much influence over other people to be able to listen to her, to be able to participate in all these things. I mean, you would think that one of these people would be like, hey, you know what, Lori, I'm going to call a timeout. I'm not going to be part of this. But this is very rare in the criminal justice system. I think this is what makes this case so sensationalized, and so people are glued, to their TVs watching it, because you don't see a female, pretty much criminal mastermind here who has been doing this over the past, couple of years, killing her kids, killing her, her family, her husband. I mean, this is just something that, made for TV drama for sure, but it's actually real life. So it's going to be interesting when we see July 25th, what's going to happen, for sentencing, to see what's going to happen when this thing comes to an end. And as far as the defense side, Lori, better hire the best appeals attorney in the world. If she doesn't do that, she probably never see the light of day ever again.
And she's indigent. She has the appeal going on in Idaho. But you're right, the psychology of this is so fascinating. How does this happen? How does one do this with multiple people? Rich, what do you expect or look forward to hearing from Brandon Boudreaux in victim impact statements?
Well, I haven't had any conversations with him about that, so I'm just pure speculation. But I'm sure that, he made some comments after the jury's verdict, and I would expect that his victim impact statement would be consistent with what he has said publicly about it, that he's had the opportunity to tell his story. He's confident that justice has been done. It's not just him. I think Kay Woodcock is going to be the more dramatic one on an impact statement for the sentencing regarding Charles. She's been very vocal about this all along, but this is going to bring some closure. I hate that term, frankly, but it'll be some amount of satisfaction for her to be able to address Lori directly, because her testimony, frankly, got kind of cut off. Lori didn't want to confront her in the courtroom during that trial, but now Kay's going to have an opportunity to address her directly. So I think that's going to be pretty dramatic.
Yeah, Taylor, that was pretty quick, and Kay as well. Met her when you were post July 11th, 2019. They have gone head to head in some ways, but most recently in this last trial, she can really speak for her brother Charles, and she can, as Rich said, that closure and being able to put the final nail in this coffin.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really, a powerful moment when Kay gets to make that impact statement. You think about it, it's been going on for over 6 years, like we talked about. So all of that, all of the stress, all of everything, all the emotions that Kay has had to go through and feel because of Lori Vallow, someone who she loved and she trusted, who absolutely betrayed her in the worst fashion by killing her brother and killing her grandson. I assume that it's going to come out. It's all going to come out, and it's going to be probably very therapeutic for Kay. She got to say a little bit up in Idaho, but that was with knowing that we still had Charles's trial to go through. And so with it being like the culmination now, I assume that it's going to be very therapeutic for her and very powerful. And, I know she'll do a great job. She's done a great job advocating for Charles and advocating for Tylee and JJ throughout these 6 years.
Well, as you guys have mentioned too, she's no stranger to this, unfortunately, and so this is for her nothing new. But Judge Mel, I'll ask you, Lori, just so our viewers are aware, there are no rules that I'm aware of that when she gives her closing statement, if you will, to the judge before she hears her sentence. Do we see Judge Boreski at any point cutting her off, or because again, opening arguments, closing arguments, there were rules. There were rules if she wanted to take the stand in her own defense and how that needed to proceed. But in this instance, she can pretty much go up there and say whatever she wants. No.
Yeah, typically she's got very broad latitude. Sentencing, almost anything can come in. She can give her views or statements or opinions. I did want to say one thing about that, though. Earlier in some of the broadcasts, one of the questions I had was that looking at the life sentences in Idaho and then looking at the first conviction of Charles Vallow, I'd raised a question of whether it's anything is accomplished with Brandon Boudreaux. That said, I think Brandon Boudreaux was an absolute key in this case. There'd been the murder of Vallow that the investigators appeared to be treating it as self-defense. Then you have Daybell's wife dying, and they're coming up with autopsy findings, results that they are pretty much skated. And it's only when the shot goes at Brandon and he recognizes Alex Cox and all of the pieces are put together. I think Brandon was outstanding and exceptional. And I'm really grateful that they pursued that case, that was heard. I think there's a possibility that it's not over yet. There may be one person down the road. I'm unsure where they're at on that, but there's one other person that could be a part if they feel there's enough evidence that someday might be charged.
Oh, and are you referring to Melanie Pawlowski?
Right.
Yeah, that was a big moment when Trina Kay said that she's a part of this open investigation and she was involved. But again, no charges have been recommended at this point by Gilbert police, but that is something that sticks out. Let's talk about Allecution. I mean, this is important because I remember back in July of 2023, Lori Daybell addressed Judge Stephen Boyce in Idaho, and before he gave that sentence, she said no murders happened in the deaths of JJ, Tylee, and Tammy. She talked about how they were all busy and happy and that Jesus knows who she is. I mean, if you flash back to that day, we didn't know what we were going to get. We knew we would hear victim impact statements and how emotional and powerful that would be, but that was a bombshell once she opened her mouth and basically denied everything that she was found guilty of. Could we see that if she does give another allocution again on July 25th? Taylor, what do you think?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Throughout these years, she's never taken 1 ounce of responsibility or accountability. She continually, after the trials have been done, in any interviews that she's done, she's deflecting, she's spinning the story. It's that she's a goddess. She's smarter than everybody. We just don't know. We're too dumb to understand or comprehend, what's happening, the plan that has been set forth for her and Chad, and that they are 100% innocent. And I would expect nothing different, if she does speak. And I would expect she would speak, just like Judge Mel said. She likes to perform, and she knows that this may be one of the last times that she'll be able to perform publicly in a court setting. And so I would expect her to ramble on, and like I said, deflect.
And she has shifted blame because in her request for a new trial, she said she was too sick to proceed and she was treated unfairly by Judge Boreski. We know she's tried to get him removed multiple times from the case, and that did not work. But is it because it's her, so we look at these requests and sort of, I don't know, people scoff and they laugh? But Benjamin, a request for a new trial, that's normal after a conviction, but was there any merit for her to say that, she was just too sick to proceed?
She has to do something, right? And she has to represent herself and throw something against the wall. So a motion for a new trial, just to show, tell the viewers, that's very normal. A motion to appeal, that's very normal in most cases. And when you lose a case, that's all you can do really is to ask for a new trial and to try to appeal. Whether or not it's meritless, that's something that, the judge already just said, hey, I'm not giving you a new trial, and the Court of Appeals will decide whether or not she gets a new trial by the Court of Appeals. But based upon listening to the evidence, I highly doubt any Court of Appeals, the Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, whoever is going to overturn these convictions, unless they find something really crazy that the jurors might have done illegally or done something. But besides that, based on the facts of the case, it's going to be really hard to overturn this. But like again, Lori Daybell has to do something, and these motions are messed up motions, but she's trying her best she can representing herself.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm wondering, does she continue to represent herself on direct appeal?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. We don't know. I guess we'll see what happens there. She's not in Idaho, but as for here, I don't know. It's just that she was very adamant about representing herself and carrying forward with the trial, even though, she said she was too sick. We could not delay this any further. And Judge Boreski said there is no evidence that you have anything other than just like a common cold. Like you're dealing with something, but you don't have a virus. You don't have like COVID or something where you need to be quarantined. And you also had the chance. He told her, you could have been represented by your public defender, but she didn't want to wait here and be here for another year and wait for that trial because the defense needed time to prepare with all the discovery that there is. And we know that first she wanted her sentencing done as quick as possible so she can get back to Idaho, because we know about the conditions in Australia jail compared to an Idaho prison. I'm just going to speculate that it's probably better out there in Idaho for her, and she wanted to leave, yet she motions for a new trial. So what does she want? I don't think any of us know what Lori really wants.
No, and I think, again, we know that she got sick at the end of the 1 week, had the whole weekend to recover, comes in a couple of days later. You can understand why they want to figure out what the diagnosis was. Again, this feels like it's all part of this appeal to kind of make sure everything's in line as they move forward with this, because we know 30 days later she's got to be back in Idaho. So Ben, let me ask you this: if when the appeals happen, what does she need to do? She can do this, and she can still represent herself in an appeal and do so if she's still in Idaho. So if she goes back to Idaho, this whole thing can proceed while she's still there, correct?
Yes. I mean, she can still go into Idaho and still write in her jail cell why she believes there should be a new trial. So she needs to dig deep and find out why Judge Boreski, if there's anything that Judge Boreski did that messed up her case or made an illegal ruling. That's how you win an appeal. You have to show that the judge or the prosecutor or the jurors did something was like pretty much not, with the law, and that's gonna be hard to find. But so she's gonna have to dig deep in her legal, books to find something here to convince the Court of Appeals. And even then, it has to be, hardcore error, I would say. There's this thing called harmless error, meaning like, hey, Judge Boreski might have messed up here, or the prosecutor might have messed up here. It doesn't mean that you're not guilty. You're still guilty, even though there was a small little mess up, right? Maybe he should have continued the trial for another day because you were sick. But that's not going to give her, a brand new trial. She has to go down deep and find something that the judge ruled against, that was, he looked at the law incorrectly, or the prosecutor, did something by allowing evidence to come in that shouldn't have come in. But that's the only way you'll see any sort of Court of Appeals to overturn this conviction.
Rich, and I'll go to you, Taylor, with the same question. What element of this case and this whole saga will stick out to you the most in 10, 15, 20 years when you look back?
Oh, man. 15 or 20 years from now, for me, that'll be over. Yeah, that's, I don't know. It's just, it's everything about it is, it is kind of the cumulative stuff. it became personal because things were happening while I was involved, and I'm sure it's the same for Taylor. That you're watching these events unfold. People were dying while they're trying to get some attention for it, and I think that's the part that will stick to me. And could it have been avoided? I'd be interested in knowing from Taylor if he thinks this could have been avoided if more attention had been paid to Charles' death in July of 2019, because events unfolded fairly quickly, but there was still time between July and October in particular that could these have been stopped? Could the deaths of these children have been stopped? We can speculate all day long, I'm sure, on that, but there's a lot of what ifs and a lot of whys.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Taylor.
Yeah. So, I mean, number one thing that's always going to stick with me is that Charles called the shot. 5 months earlier, came into our office and he said, if I die, it was Alex who did it at the hands of Lori's direction. And that's exactly how it played out 5 months later. So obviously that's a very shocking thing when someone comes into your office and says that, but then for it to actually happen 5 months later, it's just, that's wild. I'll never get over that. And then to kind of talk to, Rich's question, absolutely preventable. I will never get that out of my head that if, Chandler PD would have taken it a little more serious and pulled back the curtain a little bit, they would have seen the web that was being weaved by Chad and Lori. As soon as I heard about Charles's death, I knew 100% that it wasn't an accident, that it wasn't self-defense, that it was an ambush, and that he had, called his shots, from the grave pretty much. And the fact that, I thought immediately that I would be interviewed by Chandler PD, that they would come and look, for anything that they could get out of my file, because I had emails, text messages, recordings, all these things that Charles had given me to, corroborate these things, because he told this crazy story. And here I am, supposedly, his attorney and his voice. Well, I got to corroborate these things before I put it in writing and sign my name on it. And so, I was like, Charles, you got to give me some proof. And he provided me the proof. And, I'll never forget Charles's family contacting me and saying, hey, can you contact Chandler PD? Can you contact the Detective Moffat? Can you help, find this and find that? Can you talk to him about the order of protection that Charles went and got against Lori, but, when we were representing him? All these things that, just seem to be just dismissed, even when the family of a victim is pounding the table and saying, hey, you need to look at these things. I do think that it would have been preventable. The kids weren't murdered until September. And so I really think that there's a lot of blood on people's hands that shouldn't be.
So there's a whole month and a half between July 11, 2019 and early September 2019. So you're right. If they would have called you or called you back, I don't even know if they got in contact with you, Taylor. I don't assume they did.
Never talk to any law enforcement.
Yeah,
Never.
They would have seen the court filings and the divorce paperwork, and then would have tracked them to Gilbert PD's record of the body cam footage in January 2019. So yeah, I know it's a lot of could have, would have, but these are people's lives that were ended right after that. I think that would have raised concern to say, okay, Charles has been complaining about his wife's mental health for a long time, and if this is what she's saying is true, who's in her custody? Her two kids.
Absolutely. And the other part of it too is that, they may have been concerned about attorney-client privilege because it does survive the grave, right? I still have to, have that. Charles still has that privilege with me. He still has that right. However, I think that it was impliedly waived when it's to help solve his murder and that he foretold of. but also protect Tylee and JJ, who he was very, scared of what Lori was going to do if she continued to have custody over them. He wanted JJ to go with Kay and live out his days in Louisiana because Lori had said, I don't want anything to do with JJ. He's just a hindrance and a burden and, in front of my mission. So to not even really start pulling some of those threads and uncovering it. And it wasn't until Brandon Boudreaux, had to go through what he had to go through, one of the most terrifying things I think anybody could imagine going through. He had to be that voice to, put things together, get the right hand talking to the left hand as far as law enforcement. And, unfortunately, he's also the one that had to go identify the, JJ's body. I just can't imagine what he had to go through. And so, to that point, I expect Brandon's impact statement to be very powerful as well.
Looking back on this, Judge Mel and Benjamin, I want you to tell me which trial Lori Daybell did better with representing herself in.
That is asking an impossible question. It was hideous on both trials.
There has to be a worse one. You have to choose.
I mean, I've seen defendants representing themselves dozens of times over the years. Lori can claim, and I will not fight her on this, that she did positively the worst job you could have done. Couple that with her on-scene presence with the death of her husband, the nonchalant way calling friends to say the children are with her. I think this case will go down in history much like the Manson case. People are fascinated. Years later, they're fascinated. I go work out on the treadmill at the clubhouse that I go to and look for stories of the Idaho trial. I'm sitting here the other day watching a story of Melody and Lori's brother out in the car over there stalking Brandon, where there's orders of protection. There were all kinds of warnings out there that this thing was dangerous. And I think it's been pointed out those warnings were overlooked. And I think there's going to be a lot of people looking back over the years have genuine regrets because 2 children may have been able to survive had people detected that Daybell's wife and that Vallow had been murdered, not dying accidentally or dying in their sleep.
Benjamin?
Yeah, I mean, that's what makes it so like this amazing how she's able to just continue to get away with everything. But to answer your question, Justin, in order to see what trial she did better at or did worse at, right? I mean, both were bad, of course, but I think the second trial, the conspiracy trial, I think she had a chance there because you have to show that she, conspired with somebody else, right? Mm-hmm. And she wasn't even on the scene, as we know, for the conspiracy trial. I don't think she was even there, as far as we know, as far as the shooting.
Yeah.
The alleged shooting of Brandon, right? She wasn't there. So I think if she had an attorney or she went there and said, hey, everybody, I wasn't even there, I mean, if there was a bullet that was shot, yeah, we can say that Brandon was shot. However, I wasn't there. How can they say I conspired with him to do this? Of course, there's other evidence of videos later on, of course, but I think if any case that she had, the second case with Brandon, she had a better chance, at least maybe getting a hung jury and confusing some of the jurors based on the conspiracy charge.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. Again, there was so much evidence in all of these trials. It was going to be almost impossible to kind of beat them from her perspective. But yes, with the Brandon case, all the evidence kind of pointed obviously to Alex, not only being the shooter, but him, the driving force behind what happened that day. We look a lot, I think, at, her being the arcing figure in all of this. We know what Chad's role was. Should we take into account, again, I don't want to make excuses for law enforcement I do believe that, all detectives have a tough job. But we've talked a lot about all the dots involved in this case and the lack or the inability of whether it's Chandler or Gilbert on a local level to connect those dots. I do wonder if this case, and they'll never say this, but I wonder if these two cases, just the local ones, made it so that they can now better communicate amongst themselves, because we know now all the evidence that they had, like you said, Taylor, the court filings, the body camera video that they had of Charles expressing concern, just the body camera and the reading of the body language of Lori outside the home the day Charles was shot. Should we look at this as maybe closure for those two departments to say, look, we understand there were mistakes made. They'll never tell us on record that this could have been prevented. But I do wonder if the communication among these two departments has gotten better as a result of this, or their ability to maybe work together. Ben, you might see this in the courts moving forward. Do you see that this may have the silver lining in this is that it teaches them to really communicate better with one another when they have more than just a domestic violence case? I mean, this is, you had a shooting, you had orders of protection, you had ultimately missing children reports, things like that. I wonder if we'll see moving forward them communicate a lot better.
No, we hope so. And to Taylor's point, I'm surprised that none of the law enforcement came to talk to Taylor. That would be the obvious thing to do. And we represent criminal defendants. We represent victims also. And you hear these stories over and over again, unfortunately, that people are not getting justice because sometimes law enforcement is just so busy and they have tons of files and investigations to do. Sometimes they have to focus on another one versus an important one. And this case is very important, or else you could have prevented more people from getting hurt and dying. So hopefully, you're right, OB. Hopefully, this will teach a lesson not only for Chandler and Gilbert, but for all law enforcement to take victims' cries seriously and look at the evidence and pretty much take a pause when people are coming to you and saying, "Hey, I'm being threatened here. I'm being I might be getting killed." I mean, because hopefully there's enough resources to prevent future killings and future people getting harmed.
And the truth is that both departments, Chandler and Gilbert, won't interview about this, even though they got a win, they got convictions, and they won't talk about it. And that says a lot to me, because it seems more of like this is redemption when they know what happened in the beginning and the missteps. They don't want to be asked about that, about what happened in the beginning, about anyone dropping the ball. So I think usually when you get a win in a case like this, there's a chance of, well, let's talk about this on the record. There's been no indication of that. We've tried, of course. Rich, though, in Idaho, how does this saga exemplify good police work no matter the size of the agency? And I'm pointing at Rexburg PD here.
Right. They certainly were the ones that moved this ball forward. I mean, in defense of both Gilbert and Chandler a bit, it's easy to look in hindsight that this was obvious, but it was kind of this building kind of problem, and after there was multiple crimes that were occurring, that's when the police departments got their attention. It was Gilbert and Chandler that were in touch with the Rexburg police, letting them know there was communication going on between those police agencies at that point. But at that point, the kids were missing. There had already been a series of crimes involving Charles and Brandon and suspected of Tammy because of some unusual things that had happened with her at that point. And so that's when the communication started. And there was an incident in American Fork involving Melanie and the kids, and there was off to Hawaii, and so the Hawaii Police Department was involved. And because there was multiple states, the FBI was brought in. So it's, like moving a big battleship to get all these police agencies coordinated. But once they got together, there was a lot of amazing work that was done, and they went back. It's not the kind of thing that, when Charles died, there was a self-defense argument to be made, and so they weren't. Even though they probably were unsettled about how Lori was acting, they would have had to prove it wasn't self-defense before they could call it murder. And so they weren't throwing all of the resources necessary to do that investigation until other things started happening. And even with Brandon's shooting, and to their credit, it was somebody in Gilbert Police, I never knew who, but it was Gilbert Police who recommended to Brandon that he hire a private investigator.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that was part of it, is that, they knew they weren't going to be able to move it forward. And if Brandon felt that there was something untoward about, he said, get a private investigator involved. And that's why he called me. But that's, I just think it took that series of crimes to get all of this organized, unfortunately.
Which leads back to Judge Mel's point, is that Brandon is key in all this, and an unsung hero is Detective Ryan Pillar with Gilbert PD, connecting the dots and starting that communication with Fremont County in Idaho and Rexburg. And then it all starts to finally come together, even though, victims had already been lost. And that's the sad part. And we know that when FBI comes in, the resources, it hits different. There's just certain resources that the small police departments don't have. So the FBI was huge in this. And then I have to get back to that American Fork City, Utah incident. Rich, you were working with Brandon at the time, and at this moment, this body camera catches Melanie trying to get in contact with her kids who are being watched by their grandparents, Brandon's parents, and they are not letting her in, and Alex is waiting in the car. Were you in fear for your own safety at points when you did any surveillance or investigating into their whereabouts and what they were doing?
Well, not directly. I mean, I was surveilling Alex Cox before he left Arizona. When he came back to Arizona, he was going back and forth, and he took the Jeep up. But I had him under surveillance. But he didn't know it, so I didn't feel like I was in any danger. But I was fearful for Brandon's kids, and it wasn't the trespass incident that came later. Alex Cox and Melanie Boudreaux drove from Arizona in a U-Haul. And while they were in Arizona, they were looking for Brandon's kids, Brandon and Melanie's kids. They were looking for them. They posted on social media offering a reward for information about where are my kids. And then they loaded up that U-Haul, had them under surveillance, and they were headed right for American Fork in Salt Lake City. They were driving there. So that's when things really got tense. It was the day that they were driving through. We weren't sure if they had figured that out, and they were headed to go get those kids. And so I was working with the American Fork Police at that day, and a variety of other things. But then amazingly, they just drove right by. They drove within a couple of miles of where those kids were, and kept heading north to Rexburg. So that was a very tense day. We had no idea what was going to happen that day.
I mean, wow, I don't know how normal it is for you on your day-to-day, but you were watching a murderer, and we're talking about Alex Cox.
Right. Oh, yeah. No, I was watching him and Melanie load a U-Haul with all the equipment. I saw Alex get out of a car with a duffel bag, a green duffel bag that certainly looked like it had a rifle in it, just the shape of it. It was definitely dicey in those early days.
And the investigative reporter in you kept you going. I respect it. Staking it out like back in the day. Well, I mean, it's part of your normal day to day, I assume. Just I don't know if that to that degree. That sounds a little scary. Final thoughts on sentencing and the end of this saga.
I'll give you one, Justin. If you ever get a chance to interview people at Chandler PD, just ask him one question: when did they get the ballistics report on Charles's shooting? Because that's always stuck in my mind that, and that came out at trial, right? That we kind of called it the kill shot. When Charles was on the floor after being shot at point blank range, he was shot again while he was laying there on the floor. That the medical examiner, kind of opined that was the kill shot that hit him in the chest. To me, I would love to know when they got that report. Was that before September? Was that before October? Because to me, that changes the game from self-defense, and they could have held, in my mind, in my opinion, they could have held Alex in custody at that point and prevented some more murders. So if you ever get that chance, that's the one question that I think that Charles's family deserves to know, Tammy's family deserves to know, and also Tylee's family, but also the public just in general deserves to know.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Maybe one day. Benjamin, final thoughts?
No, I mean, this chapter is finally coming to a close on July 25th. So we're going to see most likely Justin Borowski, as the panel has already said, probably stack her sentencing, meaning show them consecutively. And this might be the last we hear of her unless there's some sort of appeal issue. But like I don't see any appeal issue. I don't see anything she can do to be, get a new trial. So once, she's sentenced, she's gonna be shipped back to Idaho to spend the rest of her life in a prison cell.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the sentencing, it isn't really the numbers or the specifics that matter because she's serving life anyway, but just to know that she gets sentenced to, I guess the maximum for the families of the victims, for Brandon, for the victims in general, that's what they're looking for, is that full justice, 25 to life potentially, another 2 terms. Judge Mel, what do you think the call is before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I think there is no doubt that she's going to receive maximum sentences. They will run consecutive to the Idaho sentences. If there's one part of this entire case that I think is tragic, actually 2 parts. I didn't realize until this program that the police had never interviewed Taylor. And with the case pending, that blows me away. But to me, the biggest disappointment of the entire outcome, looking at the heinous nature of these crimes, a husband, a wife, 2 little kids, and another person almost killed. I am sorry the death sentence was not on the table for Lori Vallow Daybell, because if there's ever a person deserving of that, given the facts that have already come out, given her demeanor, given the cold-blooded nature of this, she should be going on death row rather than spending the rest of her life in prison.
Well said. To the panel, thank you guys so much. We will see you on Sentencing Day, July 25th. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. The end of an era. We will see what Borowski hands down, as he's been waiting for this moment and probably been focused on it. I know that he's already rotated out of his division, but is finishing this up. And that's what he meant to do. Yeah.
Well, we talk about putting a bow on this. Obviously, we'd be remiss if we didn't say that there is obviously, as we mentioned earlier, still a case open on Melanie. But yeah, I mean, I think you can look at the 25th and go, the biggest bombshells are going to, what will Borowski say before he hands down a sentence? This will be, we've heard from the victims' families. We've heard from Kay and Brandon before. Their testimony or their impact statements will be powerful. We've heard from Lori. So, other than, sound bites here and there, I mean, we kind of know what
explosive ones that
we're
used to in this very weird way. We're used to that.
And I don't think there's anything that will come out of what she says will be surprising
or helpful.
Yeah, helpful. No. But I am curious. This will be Borowski's opportunity to probably say, the quiet part out loud or say something that he's been wanting to say these last 2 trials. So I think that'll be very powerful before he hands down, the sentence that I think we all expect. Yeah.
That is going to, and so you will want to be streaming with us as that all unfolds. It'll be on a 5-minute delay at 9 a.m, July 25th. And we'll be watching all that. And yes, what will Judge Borowski have to say to the Doomsday Mom, Lori Daybell? We will see you guys next time on The Record.